Hello there, welcome to An Abundance of Books. My name is Julia and today we're going to be talking about the 10 worst books that I read in 2021. This is a ranked list starting with the least worst going to the worst and it was actually super easy for me to come up with. Right now I'm still fiddling with my best books, but this one run through, I had it. Don't mind that the shelf is empty, we're just going to put all the books that I own that are the worst on here as we go. But most of them, thankfully, I don't own. All the typical disclaimers: if you enjoyed this book, I don't think it's a reflection on you. I'm happy that you enjoyed a book that you liked. And I don't think any of the books that I'm going to talk about have any sort of problematic stuff in them. Like, I don't think there's anything, well, now I've just remembered one. And maybe if you're someone who typically disagrees with the type of books that I like, maybe this is just a recommendation video. Okay, I think that's enough rambling. We can go ahead and get started. My 10th worst book of the year is An Anonymous Girl by Greer, Hendrix, and Pekkanen. This I read super early on in the year. It was a January book, and it has stuck with me how much I hate it. It is about this woman who is taking some psychology tests at a local school, and she sort of gets involved in one of the teachers' lives. And I'm struggling to remember what happens, but because it was nothing. It was so incredibly boring. A thriller that isn't a thriller. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with a premise like that, but it didn't really seem interested in doing those. And all of the twists weren't really twists. You could see them coming a mile away. Huge disappointment because Greer, Hendrix, and Pekkanen's other two books I do really enjoy. They were both 5 stars for me, I think. 4 or 5. And so to have a 2-star from them is really disappointing. Coming in at number 9, we have Darling by Ancrum. This is sold as a Peter Pan retelling, but it's boring and confusing and not appealing at all. This book was part of what made me realize that I don't enjoy adaptations, especially an adaptation that is so direct here, like Wendy being called Wendy, Peter being called Peter. Like, it's set in the modern day, but Peter Pan is just like a name that everyone accepts. It was trying to go for a more gritty feel, like the Lost Boys are all orphans or runaways and trying to have something to say about society, but ultimately it came away really hollow. I was fooled by the beautiful cover and I am upset. In the number 8 spot is Clara and the Sun by Casvo Ishiguro. This one, when I was making the list, I was really surprised that it was at number 7 and not lower on the list, because I really hated this book. This is the one that I read most recently, so maybe it's just my rage is still recent, but it just means we've got some really bad books coming up. This is a story about a robot who befriends a child, and it's about their relationship, but it didn't do any of the things that I enjoy in a robot artificial intelligence story. There is no discussion about like growing and your humanity and stuff. It feels like it's going there and then it just doesn't. There are hints at some magical realism too that really didn't work for me. All of the characters were super flat. Clara, being a robot, she doesn't understand exactly what people are saying all the time, or the way that humans can kind of like double speak. She doesn't get that, and it's really frustrating to read her trying to come to terms with something that you as the reader intentionally understand immediately. I know that this author has tons of work that also sounds like it'll appeal to me, so I am planning on picking up more in the future, but this one really wasn't it. And it won some awards and I just can't. The 7th worst book that I read is Love, Heather by Laurie, Petrou. This one I picked up on a whim from the bookstore. I've never heard anyone speak about this. It has very few ratings on Goodreads. So I think this one is sort of a shooting myself in the foot kind of thing. This I originally picked up for a video that never ended up happening, but I did finish the whole book before realizing that wasn't going to happen. This is loosely a retelling of the 80s movie Heathers. Dee's idea is to play some pranks, signing each Love Heather an homage to her favorite 80s revenge flick, which like sounds good, but isn't what the story is about. This is also the one where, when I said there was nothing problematic, there is a character in here who is transgender and is in the midst of transitioning, and it wasn't handled poorly, but it wasn't handled well. The characters in here are not kind, and while that might be like an accurate representation, it is hard to read. This also had a twist that I absolutely hated, and it just didn't make any sense. The narrative doesn't go anywhere. It's not a good time. The number 6 worst book is In the Quick by Kate Hope Day. This one is my bad. I feel bad putting it on this list because all of the books that I'm talking about I read to completion. There are no DNFs on here. This book I should have DNF'd, and I didn't, because I was holding out hope that it would do something interesting, and it really didn't. It is touted as The Martian meets Jane Eyre, and your first thought is, how in the world could that possibly work? And the answer is, it doesn't. The sci-fi aspects of it are really underdeveloped. The characters are all super flat and boring. It feels like the dry writing of a classic, but it's supposed to be fun. Like, they go to space. How is that not fun? But sadly, that's what we came away with. I'm realizing I have very little to say about most of these books because they've sort of been purged from my mind at this point. The 5th worst book that I read, another one that I was surprised was this high on the list, was Hench by Natalie Zina Walshcott. This is a superhero type of story about a woman who does administrative work for supervillains. It's super fun in theory, but I did not enjoy this story at all. I found it really cyclical. I found it really dull for a superhero story, like something that should be action-packed. I found the action really confusing, and the characters all really flat, and the ending, it was way too over the top. I understood what it was trying to do in theory, and the first few chapters I was absolutely loving, but it totally fell off the rails after that. This is one where I know a lot of people really enjoyed this book. It's one of their favorites, and I don't understand, but I'm very happy for you. The 4th worst book that I read was Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas. This is another Peter Pan retelling. Can you see a theme? This is another modern interpretation where they all have the names of what they have. And it had an interesting ending. Like, where we ended up was sort of interesting, but getting there was not fun. Peter and Wendy also have a little flirtation, but it's weird because he's like 8 when he shows up and slowly ages, and it's unclear if he is a child or if he is immortal. It's kind of uncomfy. Mostly it's just boring. It's just too long and not enough happens, and Wendy is a really unlikable character. Sometimes when people read YA, they're like, where are the parents? Why are all these kids just running around and spending time doing whatever? And this is one where I was like, there's too many parents. We don't need this much. We don't need like every other chapter that Wendy is doing chores. That's not the book I want to read. Now we have made it to the top/bottom 3. All of these next 3 books are 1 star. Everything up until this point has been 2 stars, so these are truly the worst of the worst. I debate what order to put them in, but we're going to go with the one I settled on. The 3rd worst book that I read in 2021 was The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. Another one that I read in January and have truly hated ever since. And another one that people really enjoy. This was part of the Canada Reads video that I did, so it's like award-winning. And look at this cover. Look at this cover. But it's super disappointing. It's a fantasy romance, sort of, about Beatrice Claiborne as she is like getting ready to debut, you know, her coming out party and stuff. But she doesn't want to get married because when women get married in this society, they have to give up their magic. And she wants to become a mage, but only men are allowed to become mages. And that's so dumb. Like, it's such half-baked feminism in this book. Like, it feels like it's trying to say something, but it's just like, I think men and women should be equal. Do you need this many pages to tell you that? It's incredibly frustrating to read, and all of the men in it are caricatures. There's a love interest who is feminism's #1 fan. He supports Beatrice unconditionally. He'll like give up all of his inheritance. He's just insufferably good. And then her father is the picture of evil, you know, wants to lock her away in a tower, you know, classic stuff. There's also quite a bit of discussions of magic in here and like how you do the magic and casting spells and stuff, which I'm not a fan of. Fantasy is a hard genre for me to get on board with in general. This one I definitely would have DNF'd were it not for the audiobook. Not that the audiobook was especially good, but I could mindlessly look at my phone while listening to it. 1 star, but I will never get rid of it because that cover is just so beautiful. The second worst book that I read this year was 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. This one does feel unfair because I knew I wasn't gonna like it going into it. I'm not a big fan of The Hating Game, the book. Movie is a different story, but part of me also thought that like, hey, everyone who loves The Hating Game hates 99% Mine, maybe I will be the same but opposite. But no, it's just a very bad book. These are 2 of the most unlikable characters I have ever read from. They should not be together at all. It's the story of this woman who has inherited her grandmother's house after she's died, and her childhood best friend is helping her fix it up. And the story is so obvious where it's going, but it doesn't have any of the fun banter that was so prevalent in The Hating Game. This one is just 2 miserable people who are sexually harassing each other, but it's okay because they both secretly like each other. In a romance too, you really have to like one or both of the characters preferably, and I didn't like either of them. I didn't like the story. There's really nothing appealing in here. Which means we have come to our number 1 worst book of 2021, which is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This one I knew was going to be a bad time. I tried reading it the year before and DNF'd it, but came back to it, which like, again, was my fault. I should not have read this book, but I don't understand people who enjoy this. It's written in such a confusing way. It's about Gideon, who is they have a bunch of weird words for it, but she's like a knight to the princess, and they have to go on this competition to the emperor, and he like picks someone to run something. I'm explaining it really poorly because I genuinely don't know what happened. So because she's the 9th house, logic would dictate that there are 8 other houses, which immediately means your cast is 18 plus because they all have like a knight and a royal person, which is too much. You can't keep track of 18 characters and what house they come from and like their formal name versus their given name. And I never had a sense of where we were. It's science fiction fantasy, so like they travel between planets, but it's so fantasy based, and they're living in this big castle that I never got a sense of its size or space or like where everyone was in relation to each other. They have to go through a bunch of trials in order to win the competition, and they never made sense. It was unclear how you win or why you win, and then there was a mystery element to it where it was like, I am so lost. There is no hope of me A, solving this, or B, once they tell me what happened, understanding. I think that I'm putting this in the last spot because 99% Mine, at least I understand what happened. In The Midnight Bargain, I understood painfully too of what was happening. In this, I spent 400 pages with these characters, and I couldn't tell you anything about them. So there you go. Those are my 10 worst books of 2021. Most of them, like, I had a good time with. I either read them for a video or like there was some driving force behind me wanting to finish it. Oh, I should mention both 99% Mine and Gideon the Ninth I did as buddy reads. So someone else was there to endure the torture with me. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed, and let me know if you agree with me on any of these books. Only if you agree though. If you want to try to convince me that The Midnight Bargain is good, you can try, but I won't be swayed. I will be back in 2 days with my best books of the year, so look forward to that once I figure out what my best books actually are. I will see you then. Bye.